What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah,
How
you
are you
bet.
doing?
I'm good up here in Bellingham, Washington, making my way back to Lake Tahoe. That's where you're at, and that's where we met. Um,
That's
and
right.
yeah, my favorite meetings are chairlift meetings, and
Yeah, you and me both.
that's where we met. We actually that's I got the old Squaw Valley hat on right here. I don't know if anyone can see that, but the mountain formerly known as Squaw Valley, USA, is now Palisades, but I think we'll forever in our hearts know it as Squaw Valley. And one of my favorite times to meet people and get out there is skiing, and we met on the chairlift this winter, and uh we talked about what I do and microdosing and with Mind's Eye, and you became a very loyal customer and just wanted to talk to you about um what your curiosities were, coming into taking a product like the Mind's Eye and microdosing for a therapeutic benefit, and how it has helped your human experience, and what pre-Dave was like, and what in the flow with the microdosing's like, and if any like really cool transformations have come forth for you. Would love to just have a conversation around that. So, um, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Westall, very very loyal customer here for Mind's Eye, and a good human and a good friend over here in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
You bet.
Yeah, in the past, I've only used psilocybin as a macro dose and more of a way to get out of my skin, so to say, and kind of experience a different side of reality. And I kind of always had in the back of my mind that I'd like to, figure out a way where, I'm more uh, lucid and, a way to use psilocybin as a therapy rather than something that's just, more recreational and, more of a party or fun time kind of activity, camping or wherever you happen to be. And I really didn't know much about it, the microdosing. I didn't know how to get started, who to talk to, and so for me and probably a lot of people, it's something that might be of interest, but the knowledge and resources surrounding it aren't as readily available. And then fortuitously, we met on a chairlift skiing at now Palisades Tahoe, and enjoying some fun times together in the sun. And we just got to talking about, I was asking you what you do for work, and all of a sudden my brain was just tickled, and I just couldn't learn enough, and just kept asking questions. And I think we shared three or so chairlifts in a row, just kind of chatting about your program and all the different medicinals that you guys provide. And um, I didn't buy them right away. I was kind of thinking about it, and it was in the back of my head. And then one day I finally was like, oh, this is something that I want to do, and I want to explore and check out. And um, just all kind of happened. I placed my first order, received it, and part of the reasoning for wanting to do this is that I have a very stressful job. I have two younger children. I have a lot of baggage from, growing up and, traumatic experiences that, most people don't even realize they have trauma in their lives. But I've found personally that as I've gotten older, I've started to understand a lot of these things and take a deeper dive in what actually happened and how that kind of formed me into the human that I am today. And some days that's easy, and other days that can be challenging. And when you put that on top of, those traumatic experiences, on top of a stressful job, um, having kids, which, that there's a lot that goes into that, and trying to give them an amazing life and great opportunities, but also being patient and thoughtful when you communicate with them. Those are all things that I wanted to do better at. And I've done some therapy, but really haven't had great success with that in terms of being consistent, providing the results that I want. There's definitely some positive aspects that I've, got from therapy in terms of just thought processes and some tools and whatnot, but it just didn't deliver the way I had hoped. And, so kind of my thought was that, in our conversation on the chairlift, you kind of talked about, um, how microdosing can really help settle your mind, provide clarity in your thought process. And for me, all those things, started happening very quickly. I've never noticed like a psychedelic effect from microdosing. So, that was something I thought about prior. I was like, what is this going to be like? And the reality is that it's barely noticeable in terms of mind alteration on a heavier scale. It's more these, clarity, uh, like your mind just has a better flow. Prior, I would say there's blockages in my mind that like
Mm.
cause thought processes to be, I guess, disrupted, and more emotional responses to triggers and things
Yeah.
like that. And for me, it really has provided this kind of level of clarity and a way to absorb, whether it's a challenging situation with the kids. They freak out after school because they're overstimulated, they haven't eaten enough. And I've noticed that my responses to the children have become uh, more level, even keeled, patient, and just trying to understand and be empathetic to their situation. So I feel like, at a certain level, those things have all been elevated, which has just made me a true believer. A lot of the things that would stress me out on a daily level, I'm able to process those stresses a little bit better, and just have a more positive outlook on things. And really, that was my number one goal, is to try and be less stressed out and to have a better thought process, and um, to really think about how I interact with the world and other people around me. And I'm just really excited for the product. I'm excited for, these kind of
Yeah.
conversations. I've joined a meeting in the past where, um, I forget the woman's name who spoke, but I got a lot out of that conversation. And
Was that
um,
Dr. Karina?
yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing a 12-week, we're putting together a 12-week course journey, a transformational journey that, everything that you're talking about is really super potent, and a transformational course with at her as an instructor. Sean Merrick is a psychonumerologist and ketamine assisted therapist, a psychedelic integration coach, Daniel, and Betsabi, ethnobotanist from UC Berkeley. So it's, all about taking the products and really bringing the awareness that you've spoken so very intuitively. I just want to reflect that back to you. Like, you have a deep level of awareness, and it's all great things that you're mentioning. There's a lot of people out there that don't have that awareness, or they want that awareness, they just don't know how to achieve it. So that's something else that we're putting into play, and you'll be able to to see what that program is, what the offer is, and all of that. But um, anonymously, I know the real estate office that you work in. I see those signs everywhere. Uh, and I know it's probably pretty stressful, especially with the amount of business that has been taking place in the Lake Tahoe region, and it's very demanding. I know a lot of friends that are realtors, and that's an industry that is like blown up over the last couple of years, especially in everywhere, but in rural areas, and then Lake Tahoe being the desirable place it is. Having two children, I'm not a father, but I know many friends that are parents and dads, and they're holding it down and holding it up at the office and their business and their job, and then they're coming home and they're taking that hat off, and they're being the dad part. And I think that's more fascinating and alluring to talk about than the job. I look at the um, a lot of people want to take the product to have like more clarity and more focus and more productivity and output. And I always say, great. If you obtain those things by taking these products, those are just byproducts, right? That's just a byproduct of the experience. But the real experience is what you're speaking of like being the dad that is more compassionate, more empathic, less reactive, more responsive, more patient, and more connecting with the children. And I talk to a lot of parents that are parenting this day and age in this modern age, and they want to, something you said, they want to give their children the things that they didn't get when they were raised, right? Or like
Exactly.
they don't want to inflict their traumas or that intergenerational um, traumas from epigenetics onto their children. So you're parenting differently, right? And one phrase that I really love that I heard from an associate Dr. Brian Sanderoff is it's connection versus correction. And connection, the microdosing of mind's eye, we don't know, right? There's not many studies on it, but you know it from experience, is you're feeling more connected with yourself, right? When we're more connected with ourself and you don't have those negative automatic thoughts that are coming through, those thought patterns that you spoke of, that's just really removing the noise and the distraction from life. So when you're more connected with self, naturally you're just going to be more connected with your loved ones, right? Your spouse, your
Yeah.
children. And it sounds like those children of yours are probably pretty awesome little humans. And being awesome little humans is a reflection of how they're parented. So I think that I would, love to explore more if, you're willing to go into that more, so because there are a lot of parents out there that are holding down jobs, right? Whether it's a dual, income household, and careers are super important to people, but also being a good parent is too, and how to balance that. That's tough, right?
Yeah.
Your mind is producing all day long. You're dealing with logistics, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with clients, buyers and sellers and brokers. Like I know the drill. I have some real estate. I'm working through refinancing a house right now. It's just this is crazy. Like all the stuff you got to deal with. And then it's like,
Yeah.
how do you turn that off, right? When you get home at, you know, 5 p.m., right? And it's like kids, how do you turn that brain off, right? Like do you have a practice for that? Do you think the mind's eye products have, or your routine with the product has helped you navigate the modern day challenges of being a man, right? Right.
Sure.
Being the man of the household, like that's a whole other conversation we can have. But being a good parent, right? And
Yeah.
like how, you know, shifting those roles. Like, do you have anything you could talk about towards that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say too is like the relationships with, children and family, that's definitely a huge part of, the benefit of the product and, dealing with situations. But I've also found just in general, my, uh, the way I communicate and think about situations with everyone that I come into contact with, I feel like I'm coming from a calmer, better place. Uh, you mentioned noise. I feel like that's one of the biggest things. It just helps filter the noise and be more focused on, the communication that we're having right now. Or if I run into someone, instead of talking about what's easy to me, which is myself and work or whatever, I'm more open to asking questions about the person and, learning more about them. And I find that has become a little bit easier. So that's nice as well. And, um, to get back to like working all day, whatever it is, 6, 8, 10 hours, depending on what the day is. And then all of a sudden you arrive home and, it can be chaotic. And, it's like, all right, we need to shift gears. We need to take off the realtor hat and put on the dad hat. And, part of that is, on the way home from work, I listen to podcasts or, some music that, helps mellow me out. And then when I get home, it's like, full on, it can be screaming kids, it can be joyful, it can be everything in between. And, really it's like, I want to know about the kids. And, that's like the biggest thing for me. It's like, all right, let's start asking questions. Let's see, do they need a snack? Do they need this? And it's like a whole thought process. And, I would say with the Mind's Eye product, it's just like it makes navigating these tricky channels easier. And, it's not to say that all of a sudden things go away and there's no stress and it's easy peasy, but it just makes the path more clear. And, my ability to deal with these situations has become better because I would say just more present and more thoughtful, and I want to know what's going on. And if someone's losing their mind, it's like instead of me getting upset and not helping it, trying to figure out a way how to, right the ship. And
Mm.
I feel like, that's a process and I'm getting better at it. But I know prior I wasn't as good at that. And I know that my wife would get frustrated with me because how can you not be empathetic to what's going on? Or, uh, you know, you're just getting upset. That's not helping the situation. And I just feel like it's easier.
You're getting
And
triggered, right?
yeah,
Like
less
that,
triggered.
that's what we call triggers, and our triggers are
Yeah,
usually identifiers from our past, and
yeah.
they're great informational sources as well. Like, why am I getting triggered? How old are your children?
5 and 7.
Yeah, so they're just rambunctious and they're just getting to know themselves and they're
Yeah,
just, big balls of energy. And it's like, okay, why is this 5 and 7 year old beautiful souls triggering me? Probably because I was doing the same thing to my parents at that age, but my parents didn't know how to manage that type of energy because
exactly.
they were emotionally stunted, right? So
Yeah,
naturally now I'm repeating the cycle. And you said the path, like the new thought processes in the path. And I always like to say these aren't problems, right? Like we go around in our life that like, oh, stress is a problem, triggers is a problem, like home life is a problem. They're just obstacles, and there are no obstacles in the path. The path is the obstacles, right? And it's just how we navigate them or how we respond to them. And it sounds very much so that you're responding in a much gentler way and less reactive. And
yeah,
that's something that every human being needs. And speaking from experience, I've done a lot of work on my reactivity, right? And learning how to respond and listen. And I like something else that you said, Dave, was uh, you're you're interested, right? You're more gentle
Engaged.
and engaged with human to human contact. Your thoughts are flowing. Like I'm super impressed. Like they're just like very much flowing out of you in a stream of consciousness. Like, ladies and gentlemen, this is not scripted by any means. This is Dave's full human experience that he's talking about. One of my teachers, Ezra Firestone, he's a solid business owner, but he's also a solid human. One thing that he says is, "Are you interesting? Or are you interested?" It's like, you're an interesting guy, Dave. I'm an interesting guy, but are you interested in other people and what they got going on? What you said you genuinely want to know about your children, right? It's like,
Yeah,
okay, do they need a snack? Like you're thinking like, what do they need? Like you're intuitively managing the situations that may have baffled you in the past, right?
exactly.
And that is just the exponential ripple effect on yourself, your home life, your children, right? Their
Yeah,
friends, like your wife, her friends, your work, right? It's like you don't want to be reactive to your children trying to figure out what's going on in them, right? And then have that, you know, wife coming at you saying you don't empathize, right? And then that in
yeah,
your head, and then it's like, oh, I didn't really sleep that well because I'm overthinking why I'm being
yeah.
reactive. And then you're showing up to work, and that,
Snowball effect.
yeah,
Yeah,
that $10 million deal, that real estate deal at your desk, it's like you can't focus on. So it's like, that's why that the links in the chain, it's like, cool, yeah, you can have focus. Like, it's not a replacement for Adderall, or it's not something that to turn your brain on and off at will, right? It's like
yeah,
having from the emotional, responsive, interested, empathic, compassionate place naturally produces the focus and the concentration and the flow,
yeah,
at work. It's not the other way around. And I think you're doing some phenomenal, phenomenal introspective work on yourself. And it's also, I'll be the first to say that it's not a magic pill. It's not a panacea. This isn't Dave just like popping the capsule in the morning and doing it. He's doing the work on himself as he's using the product. Like
yeah,
you're being introspective, and your awareness is shining shining through. You could tell. Like
yeah,
you can tell that you're taking these informational downloads, right? That the mind's eye may be providing you, right? Or the mirror effect, and you're actually letting it absorb and being reflective on it, and not just like bypassing it, right? I have
yeah.
another analogy, is like, if you have an Adderall or a Xanax on one hand, and the for anxiety relief and anxiety and depression and focus, right? Adderall and Xanax, or the mind's eye microdosing capsule in this hand, and you're just mindlessly consuming, there's no difference. There really is no difference. Yeah, one might be natural and one might be from the earth and not as harmful. But if you're not actually working on the churn, right, the psychological bedrock that the microdosing can provide, I call it's a gentle rake, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's raking those aspen leaves that are falling in Tahoe right now gently,
It's a
right?
great
So
analogy.
right, so you can pile those aspen leaves in the compost pile for later, but at the same time they're decomposing, they're bringing life, and that's what you're doing, right? It's like that's like working on that psychological bedrock that's like been compounded like the granite in Tahoe over years, is being chiseled away so you can plant those spiritual seeds for later. And that's what I hear at least. So
Yeah.
yeah,
The other thing that I would add to it is that, it's not all, perfect, and life throws challenges at you all the time. And, I definitely still have my moments where I'm not as patient, or, I don't react the way that I necessarily want to. But I think the cool thing about the product is that, after a situation unfolds, I feel like I'm more capable of looking back on what happened and saying, okay, well, this, and that, didn't go the way that I wanted them to. Um, but I get introspective and look at that and how I could handle that better. And I think for me, that's a huge part of the growth cycle, is just, figuring out what you didn't do right and coming up with a plan and how you could handle, certain situations better in the future. And to me, that comes out more easily. And this is all exciting stuff to me. It's
it's great.
I would say I wish I had this 10 years ago.
Yeah. I wish that
But I
I
have it now,
know
so that's
now.
why it's cool.
You just made me think of if I were to like dub music in is that Faces song. I wish I knew what I know now when I was younger. It's
Ooh
like,
la la.
yeah, you have it now. I feel the same way, brother. Like, being sober for 10 years, it's like, geez, I talk to kids, guys and some of my men's groups that are like just so wise, they're 30, 31 years old and talking about their value systems and, leveling up in their life. And I was like, oh, I was just running and gunning and sex, drugs, rock and roll when I was your age. It's
Yeah,
like I'm 10 years older than you. And, I just learned some of those things you're talking about like 6 months ago. Yeah.
yeah.
You know what I
Same with
mean?
me, and I'm
So
45.
yeah, so it's like I it's a good segue to close out is like it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start your healing journey or your awareness. I always say it's like it's not healing because healing is synonymous with like broken. Like I'm healing my body right now because I took a gnarly crash biking yesterday, um, physically, but like it's awareness first. Awareness is 90% of it. And when we can bring the level of awareness to ourself, that's where things get really exciting and messy, right? You're like,
Right.
it's not perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. Ignorance people say ignorance is bliss, but is it? Is it blissful
Yeah.
being ignorant of ourself and our actions and inactions? No, there's nothing blissful about it. I'd rather
Yeah.
have a high level of awareness and aptitude for what is going on internally so I can at least express it to my loved ones and practice it, right? Even if it is messy. It's like, dude, when you go out skiing, like did you shred down KT-22 West Face like, the first day you ever skied? Ever?
I mean,
No.
I did, but
You did. Yeah. I did too. Right? Yeah, because we probably had been skiing for 20 years before that, right? But like starting off,
yeah,
just like anything, whether it's sports, music, art, reading, you crawl, you walk, then you run,
takes
right?
practice.
It takes a lot of practice. So I think that's a good takeaway here. But awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's a
I
pleasure.
appreciate it. Keep up the solid work. You're doing some awesome things with life and being a dad and a husband and a good
I'm excited.
business person. So
Yeah,
keep up the excitement. If you're
yeah,
excited, you know, there's there's nothing better than learning about yourself. We can learn about so many things in this world now with the amount of information we have, and a lot of times we take for granted that the best thing to learn is about ourselves and our operating
Yeah.
system, right? We figure out how to use a lot of other operating systems, Zoom,
Yeah.
Calendly, Google, all those operating systems, uh, Salesforce, whatever CRM you use at the realty office, it's like,
Yeah.
but what about like our own internal operating system? So stay excited, keep up the passion, and keep bringing that awareness, and maybe we can chat in 90, 180 days or something, and see where Dave's been and how that's
I would
going.
love
So
that. Yeah.
awesome,
That'd
Dave.
be a lot of fun, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to chat. And thank you to you and your team for putting together such a great product that is, really beneficial. And if you're going to invest in anything, invest in yourself, and you'll be better for it. So thank you.
You bet, man. Thanks.